Relax, it's just a joke, someone said, and the lounge laughed. But the man in the corner did not laugh. Marcus Bennett sat quietly in a leather chair inside the executive lounge of Pacific Crown Airlines at Chicago O'Hare International Airport on a gray Tuesday morning, wearing a simple black hoodie, jeans, and travel sneakers, the kind of outfit that made people assume he belonged somewhere behind the boarding lines, not inside the quiet lounge reserved for premium travelers. The room smelled faintly of roasted coffee and polished wood. Sunlight spilled through tall windows where planes rolled slowly across the runway outside. A television near the bar played muted morning news while a few travelers checked emails and pretended not to listen to the laughter near the service counter. That laughter came from 3 airline employees standing beside a rolling cart. One of them, a young man named Tyler Reyes, held a small set of electric clippers he had grabbed from a grooming kit meant for quick beard trims for pilots, and he waved it like a toy while the others watched the quiet passenger across the room. "Hey man," Tyler called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "You look like you could use a first-class haircut." A few people chuckled. One of the flight attendants, Olivia Parker, stood a few steps away sorting boarding documents. She glanced over with a small frown as Tyler strolled toward Marcus, still laughing. "Relax," Tyler said, grinning and lifting the clippers. "Relax, it's just a joke." Marcus looked up slowly, his eyes calm, steady, unreadable. The kind of look that usually made loud rooms grow quiet. But not today. The employees were too entertained by their own humor. Tyler stepped closer, and with a playful buzz of the clippers trimmed a thin line across the edge of Marcus's hair. A few loose strands drifted down onto his shoulder. Laughter erupted again. Someone near the bar whispered, "Dude, that's wild." Marcus did not move. He brushed the fallen strands from his hoodie like dust and rested his hands together on his knee. The room expected anger or embarrassment, maybe a loud complaint to the manager. Instead they got silence. And silence made the joke feel bigger. Ethan Cole, the lounge supervisor, noticed the attention and walked over. Tall, confident, wearing a navy suit jacket with the airline logo stitched above his pocket. "What's going on here?" he asked. Tyler chuckled. "Just giving our guest a complimentary upgrade." Ethan glanced at Marcus, then at the clippers, and smirked. "Well, as long as he doesn't mind." Marcus lifted his hand briefly, touching the edge of his hairline, then lowered it again. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "Does this happen often?" Tyler shrugged. "Sometimes people need help loosening up." The travelers nearby laughed again. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. "That probably wasn't a great idea," she murmured. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, Olivia. It's harmless." Marcus looked around the lounge slowly, taking in every face, every phone, every amused expression. Beyond the glass windows, a silver jet taxied across the runway, its engines humming like distant thunder. The world outside kept moving. Inside the lounge, time seemed to pause. Marcus reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. Sleek, black, simple. He studied the reflection of the room in the dark screen for a moment, then tapped once. The call connected quickly. "Rachel," he said quietly. His voice was steady. "Yes, Rachel," a woman answered immediately. Marcus spoke calmly. "Start the acquisition review." Ethan frowned. "Acquisition review? What does that even mean?" Tyler laughed. "Sounds fancy." Marcus ended the call and placed the phone gently on the table beside him. Then he looked back at the supervisor with the same calm expression. "You should probably check your internal email." Ethan scoffed. "Why?" Marcus leaned back slightly. "Because the next message you read might change how this morning ends." Across the lounge, several employee tablets buzzed at the same moment. Soft notification tones cutting through the air. Tyler glanced down at his device, still smiling, until the smile faded. Ethan pulled out his own phone, confusion crossing his face. Olivia looked from the screen to Marcus slowly, and for the first time the room felt different. Quieter, heavier, like the air itself had realized something the others had not yet understood. Marcus sat perfectly still, watching the reactions ripple outward like circles on water. Ethan cleared his throat. "This better not be some kind of prank." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It isn't a prank. It's a schedule change." Tyler frowned. "Schedule change?" Marcus nodded once. "Yes. Flights aren't the only things that can be grounded." Around them travelers stopped pretending not to watch. 1. Man lowered his newspaper. Another paused mid-sip of coffee. Waiting. Marcus looked again at the loose strands of hair still resting on his shoulder, then brushed them away like they no longer mattered. The lounge was silent now. Even the television seemed quieter. And when Marcus spoke again, his voice carried across the room with calm certainty. You all thought this was funny. Ethan did not answer. Marcus continued. Moments from now, this airline will realize it just joked with the wrong passenger. Somewhere far from the lounge, inside a quiet corporate boardroom, phones were already ringing. Orders moving faster than any jet on the runway. Because the man sitting calmly in the lounge chair wasn't just another traveler waiting for a flight. He was the man about to decide whether the airline itself would take off today or not. And the buzzing phones in the employees' hands were only the beginning of that realization, spreading quietly through the room, like the first distant rumble before a storm reaches the runway. Marcus leaned back, watching Ethan read the message on his phone. The color slowly draining from the supervisor's face as he realized the quiet passenger they had laughed at wasn't just another customer passing through the lounge. He was the reason the entire building had suddenly started holding its breath. The buzz of the notification did not sound loud, but inside the quiet executive lounge it carried like a dropped glass. Ethan Cole stared down at the screen of his phone as if the message had appeared in a language he did not recognize. The confident smirk that had lived comfortably on his face only seconds earlier faded slowly, replaced by a tight stillness that spread through his posture. Tyler Reyes noticed it immediately. What is it? He asked with a laugh that sounded thinner now. Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes moved across the message once, then again, as if reading it twice might make it disappear. Olivia Parker stepped closer, holding a tablet against her chest. Ethan, she asked quietly. Around the room, the travelers who had been pretending not to watch were now openly focused on the small cluster of airline staff and the man seated calmly in the leather chair beside the window. Marcus Bennett remained relaxed, one arm resting on the chair, the other on his knee. Outside the glass wall, a Boeing jet slowly turned onto the taxiway while ground vehicles moved in careful lines beneath the gray sky. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere had shifted in a way that nobody could quite explain yet. Tyler leaned closer to Ethan. Come on, man, what does it say? Ethan swallowed once before speaking. It says corporate operations just issued an immediate executive review notice. Tyler blinked. So, Ethan looked up slowly toward Marcus, then back to the message. It says the review was triggered by the incoming ownership transfer committee. Tyler laughed again, louder this time, but the laugh sounded forced. That sounds like some corporate paperwork stuff. That has nothing to do with us. Ethan did not look convinced. Olivia shifted her weight and glanced toward Marcus. He was watching them quietly, the same calm expression on his face that had been there since the moment Tyler had turned on the clippers. That calmness made the room feel stranger than if he had been angry. Travelers exchanged quiet looks. A man near the coffee station lowered his cup slowly and leaned against the counter to watch. A woman sitting near the television adjusted her scarf and whispered something to the person beside her. Nobody wanted to interrupt what felt like the beginning of something important. Tyler glanced at his own tablet as another notification chimed. His smile faded slightly when he opened it. Okay, that is weird, he said. Ethan looked at him quickly. What? Tyler turned the screen so Ethan could see. This says executive communications are being distributed to all lounge supervisors. Ethan frowned. That does not happen during normal operations. Olivia looked down at her own device as it vibrated again. The message appeared there too. She read the headline quietly. Immediate leadership notification. The three employees stood there staring at their screens while the lounge grew quieter by the second. Marcus watched them with patient curiosity, like someone observing a process he had already seen play out many times before. Ethan cleared his throat and took a step closer to Marcus. Sir, he said cautiously, do you know anything about what is happening? Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question carefully. Yes, he said. The answer landed softly, but carried across the room. Ethan folded his arms. Care to explain? Marcus looked down briefly at the phone resting on the small table beside him. A new message appeared on the screen, and he glanced at it before meeting Ethan's eyes again. The message you are reading, Marcus said calmly, is the first stage of a corporate transition alert. Tyler scoffed. That sounds like boardroom drama. Marcus nodded once. It is. Ethan studied Marcus more carefully now. The hoodie, the travel sneakers, the relaxed posture that did not match the tension spreading through the room. Something about the situation no longer fit together the way it had 5 minutes earlier. Ethan asked slowly, "What kind of transition are we talking about?" Marcus answered without raising his voice. "Ownership." The word hung in the air like a quiet bell. Tyler laughed again, but nobody joined him this time. "You are telling me the airline is changing owners right now?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "That depends on how quickly the board confirms the final documentation." Olivia looked down at her tablet again as a longer message loaded onto the screen. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she read the opening paragraph. Ethan noticed the reaction. "What does it say?" Olivia hesitated before reading aloud. "All supervisory staff are advised to remain available for further instructions pending executive review regarding acquisition oversight." Tyler shifted his weight. Acquisition oversight. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck and looked at Marcus again. "Are you involved in this acquisition?" Marcus leaned back comfortably in the chair. "Yes." The answer came so easily that it felt almost casual. Tyler shook his head. "Wait a second. You were telling us you were involved in buying the airline." Marcus rested his hands together. "I did not say buying. I said acquisition oversight." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That sounds like the same thing." Marcus smiled slightly. "Sometimes it is." The travelers in the lounge leaned closer now, drawn in by the strange calm conversation unfolding between the airline supervisor and the quiet passenger who had not reacted to the earlier laughter. A businessman near the window whispered to someone beside him, "Something big is going on." Ethan took another step forward. "Let me understand this clearly," he said carefully. "You are saying you are connected to the ownership transfer that just triggered this executive review notice?" Marcus nodded once. "Yes." Tyler crossed his arms defensively. "That is convenient timing." Marcus glanced briefly toward the runway again, where another aircraft rolled past the terminal. "Timing is rarely convenient," he said. Olivia looked at her screen again as a new document appeared. Her voice grew quieter. "Ethan, there is a name listed in the executive oversight section." Ethan looked at her quickly. "What name?" Olivia hesitated before answering. "Marcus Bennett." The room became perfectly still. Tyler blinked once, then twice. Ethan slowly turned his head back toward the man sitting beside the window. Marcus did not move. He simply watched them with the same calm patience he had shown since the moment the clippers had buzzed earlier. Tyler spoke first. "That cannot be the same name." Olivia looked back down at the document. "It says Chairman of the Acquisition Oversight Committee." Ethan's expression tightened. "That is a corporate leadership position." Olivia nodded slowly. "Yes." Tyler looked from Olivia to Marcus and back again, as if waiting for someone to laugh and reveal the whole thing as a misunderstanding. No one did. Marcus leaned forward slightly and picked up his phone. He read the newest message and nodded once to himself before placing it back on the table. Ethan's voice sounded different now. "Mr. Bennett," he said cautiously, "are you the Marcus Bennett listed in that document?" Marcus met his eyes. "Yes." Tyler opened his mouth, but no words came out. The travelers around them exchanged stunned looks. Ethan took a breath and asked the question that now mattered more than anything else in the room. "What exactly does your role in this acquisition oversight mean for Pacific Crown Airlines?" Marcus looked around the lounge slowly, his gaze passing over the employees, the travelers, the quiet rows of chairs, and the wide windows overlooking the runway. When he finally answered, his voice remained steady and calm. "It means the future of this airline," he said, "is currently under review." The words settled over the lounge like a quiet storm cloud just beginning to form. The words "future of this airline is currently under review" did not echo loudly, but they carried enough weight to settle over the entire lounge like a sudden pressure in the air. Ethan Cole stood still for a moment longer than he intended, as if his mind was trying to reorganize everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes into a version that made sense. Tyler Reyes shifted beside him with a nervous energy that had replaced the earlier laughter. Olivia Parker kept her eyes on the tablet in her hands where the document with the name Marcus Bennett remained open on the screen. Around them, the travelers who had once tried to ignore the situation were now openly watching the conversation unfold. A businessman near the coffee station leaned closer to hear, while a woman near the window quietly slid her phone onto the table as if preparing to capture what might happen next. Outside the wide glass windows, the morning operations at Chicago O'Hare continued without pause. A white narrow-body jet rolled slowly along the taxiway, guided by ground crew in bright orange jackets. Fuel trucks moved between aircraft while distant engines produced a low, constant rumble that blended with the quiet tension filling the lounge. Inside the room, Ethan finally spoke again, but his voice had lost the casual tone it carried earlier. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, "I want to make sure we understand the situation correctly." Marcus Bennett looked at him with calm patience, as if the question had been expected long before the morning began. Ethan continued, "If you are connected to the acquisition oversight, that means corporate leadership is involved in a transition that affects this airline." Marcus nodded once. "That is correct." Tyler let out a breath and ran a hand across the back of his neck. "So you are telling us the board is reviewing the company right now while you are sitting here?" Marcus did not look surprised by the question. "Yes," he said simply. Olivia lifted her eyes from the tablet again. "The document states that the Oversight Committee has authority to evaluate operational leadership decisions," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her sharply. "Operational leadership decisions," he repeated. Olivia nodded slowly. "Yes." Tyler glanced between them and then toward Marcus. "What does that actually mean for the people working here today?" he asked. Marcus folded his hands together calmly. "It means that every decision made inside this airline, from the boardroom to the lounge floor, reflects the culture of the company," he said. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the cool air in the lounge. He had spent years building a reputation inside Pacific Crown Airlines as someone who kept operations smooth and efficient. He had always believed he understood how the airline worked from the inside. Yet the quiet confidence in Marcus Bennett's voice suggested that a much larger structure was now moving above them. Another soft notification tone sounded from Olivia's tablet. She looked down again and read silently before speaking. "There is an additional message," she said. Ethan's attention snapped toward her. "What message?" Olivia swallowed slightly. "Corporate communications are instructing all department supervisors to remain present at their current locations pending further review by the Acquisition Oversight Committee." Tyler shifted his weight again. "That sounds serious," he muttered. Ethan forced himself to maintain composure and turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "if this review concerns operational culture, perhaps it would help if we understood what exactly triggered it." Marcus studied him quietly for a moment before answering. "Reviews like this are rarely triggered by a single moment," he said. "They are usually the result of patterns." Tyler frowned. "Patterns of what?" Marcus glanced briefly toward the glass window where another aircraft moved slowly along the runway line. "Patterns of behavior," he replied. Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She remembered the moment only minutes earlier when Tyler had approached Marcus with the clippers in his hand while the others laughed. At the time, it had seemed like nothing more than a careless attempt at humor inside a relaxed lounge environment. Now that moment felt different, much heavier. Ethan noticed Olivia's expression and followed her gaze toward Marcus. "Mr. Bennett," he said cautiously, "are you suggesting that something which happened here today is part of the reason the airline is under review?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly in the leather chair and allowed his eyes to travel slowly across the room. The lounge looked the same as it had earlier that morning. Soft lighting reflected off polished wood tables while passengers sat quietly with coffee cups and laptops. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Where there had once been casual noise, there was now silence filled with expectation. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was calm but firm. "Corporate leadership does not evaluate numbers alone," he said. "They evaluate how people inside the organization treat others." Tyler looked down at the floor. Ethan remained standing, but the confidence that once supported his posture had begun to fade. The travelers continued watching. One man, near the window, whispered to another traveler that something important was unfolding. A woman at the far end of the lounge slowly closed her laptop so she could listen more carefully. Olivia glanced again at the message on her screen and then toward Marcus. "The document also says the Oversight Committee will be receiving live operational feedback," she added quietly. Ethan looked at her again. "Live feedback," he repeated. "Yes," Olivia said. Tyler exhaled slowly. "That probably means someone from corporate is watching operations across different departments right now," he said. Marcus did not correct him. Instead, he lifted his phone again and read another incoming message before setting it back down. The calm motion only increased the tension inside the room. Ethan finally spoke again, though his voice was lower now. "Mr. Bennett, I have worked in airline operations for more than a decade," he said. "I know how serious a corporate acquisition review can be, but I still do not understand why it is unfolding here in this lounge with us." Marcus met his gaze directly. "Because leadership decisions are not only made in offices," he said. "They are revealed in ordinary moments." Tyler's earlier confidence had disappeared entirely now. He looked toward Olivia and then back toward Marcus, as if searching for some sign that the situation might still turn out to be less serious than it felt. Another aircraft engine roared faintly outside as a plane accelerated down the runway in the distance. The vibration of the sound carried faintly through the windows. Inside the lounge, nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan asked the question that had been forming quietly in his mind since the first notification appeared. "Mr. Bennett," he said slowly, "are you here today as a passenger waiting for a flight, or are you here as the man responsible for deciding whether this airline continues operating the way it has until now?" Marcus allowed a small, thoughtful pause before answering. "That decision," he said, "belongs to the board of directors." Tyler frowned. "But you are part of the committee that guides them." Marcus nodded once. "Yes." The room grew even quieter than before. Olivia glanced at the document again and read the final line under the oversight section. "Authority to recommend operational suspension pending executive approval." She looked up slowly. Ethan saw the expression on her face and felt a sudden awareness that the situation inside the lounge had already become far larger than any of them expected when the morning began. Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly beside the window, watching the reactions ripple through the small group of airline staff as the realization slowly formed in their minds that the quiet passenger they had treated so casually might now hold the influence that could determine the direction of the entire airline. "I think you all understand now that something larger than this room is unfolding," Marcus Bennett said quietly, and the calm certainty in his voice carried through the lounge more clearly than any raised tone could have done. Ethan Cole did not answer immediately. He remained standing with his arms loosely at his sides, as if the weight of the situation had finally begun to settle over him. Tyler Reyes shifted again beside the service cart where the small clippers still rested like an object that no longer belonged in the room. Olivia Parker stood slightly apart from them, holding her tablet against her chest, while the glowing screen continued to display the corporate message that had already changed the mood of the entire lounge. Around them, the travelers had fully abandoned the pretense of privacy. A man near the coffee counter leaned forward with both hands resting on the polished wood surface, as if he were watching a quiet courtroom scene unfold. A woman seated near the window lowered her magazine slowly and looked from Marcus to the airline staff with clear curiosity. Even the bartender behind the small lounge counter had stopped polishing glasses and now watched the exchange without saying a word. Outside the glass wall, the morning operations of the airport continued with perfect indifference to the tension inside the lounge. A wide-body jet rolled slowly along the taxiway, guided by ground lights, while a tug vehicle passed beneath the terminal bridge, pulling cargo containers toward a waiting aircraft. The steady movement of the airport only made the stillness inside the room more noticeable. Ethan finally cleared his throat and spoke again, though his voice had lost the authority it carried earlier that morning. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, "if there is an active corporate review happening, we obviously want to cooperate fully with whatever the company requires." Marcus nodded slightly. "Cooperation is always the first step in situations like this," he said. Tyler rubbed his palms together nervously, as if trying to warm them, even though the room was comfortable. "So what happens now?" he asked. Marcus glanced briefly at the phone resting beside him on the small table, and then returned his attention to the 3 airline employees standing in front of him. "That depends on how the review process unfolds," he said. Olivia looked down again at the tablet in her hands as another message quietly appeared. She read the text, and then lifted her eyes toward Ethan. "There is another update," she said. Ethan looked at her quickly. "What kind of update?" Olivia hesitated only a moment before reading the line aloud. "Executive Oversight Committee is requesting immediate confirmation of operational conduct standards across all customer-facing departments." Tyler frowned, as if the sentence itself carried a meaning he had not yet fully understood. "Operational conduct standards," he repeated slowly. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest as he considered the words. "That sounds like they are evaluating how employees interact with passengers," he said. Marcus did not deny it. Corporate leadership often looks at operational culture when they evaluate a company during an acquisition, he said calmly. Tyler shifted his weight again and glanced briefly toward the lounge floor, as if the memory of the earlier moment with the Clippers had suddenly returned with uncomfortable clarity. Nobody spoke about it directly, but the silence that followed seemed to acknowledge it. Olivia lowered the tablet slightly and looked toward Marcus with cautious curiosity. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "may I ask something directly?" Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Of course." Olivia took a slow breath before speaking. "When you first arrived here today, you did not identify yourself or your role with the acquisition committee," she said. Marcus nodded. "That is correct." Olivia continued gently. "Was that intentional?" Marcus looked around the lounge once more before answering. "Yes," he said. Tyler lifted his head quickly. "Why would you do that?" he asked. Marcus folded his hands together again and spoke with the same measured calm that had defined his tone since the beginning of the morning. "Because real culture inside an organization reveals itself most clearly when people do not realize they are being observed," he said. The words settled over the group like a quiet realization that none of them had expected when the morning began. Ethan felt the meaning of the sentence more strongly than the others. He had spent years attending leadership workshops where executives spoke about company values and corporate culture. Yet standing in the lounge now, he understood that the quiet man sitting beside the window had witnessed something far more revealing than any formal presentation. A man near the window whispered to another traveler that the conversation sounded like a corporate investigation. The second traveler nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the scene. Tyler looked toward the small cart where the Clippers still rested. He reached down and quietly placed them inside the drawer beneath the cart, as if removing them might somehow erase the earlier moment from memory. Marcus noticed the movement, but said nothing. Olivia glanced again at her tablet, and then spoke softly. "The message also says that oversight committee members may request individual statements from staff involved in operational interactions," she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That means they might ask us questions about what happened here today," he said. Marcus met his gaze calmly. "That possibility exists," he replied. Tyler looked from Ethan to Olivia, and then toward Marcus again. "I just work in lounge support," he said quietly. "I did not expect something like this to become a corporate issue." Marcus studied him for a moment before answering. "Culture is rarely shaped by a single department," he said. "It is shaped by the choices people make in everyday situations." Outside the window, a departing aircraft lifted slowly into the cloudy sky, its landing gear folding upward as it climbed above the airport. Inside the lounge, the quiet tension remained unbroken. Ethan finally stepped a little closer to Marcus, as if acknowledging the shift that had taken place between them. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "if the Oversight Committee is evaluating the company culture, then I want to assure you that Pacific Crown Airlines takes professionalism seriously." Marcus nodded once. "That is encouraging to hear," he said. Tyler looked uncertain. "Does that mean the airline might be suspended like the message suggested earlier?" he asked. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his phone again and read a new notification that had just appeared on the screen. The glow of the display reflected briefly in his eyes before he lowered the device again. "The committee has not made a final decision yet," he said. Ethan felt the significance of the words immediately. "Not yet," he repeated quietly. Marcus nodded. "Corporate evaluations require careful review of facts before any recommendation is made," he said. Olivia looked toward Ethan again. "That sounds like the process is still unfolding," she said. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yes," he replied. Tyler glanced toward the travelers around them, who were still listening with obvious interest. The atmosphere in the lounge had become almost ceremonial, as if everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that might soon travel far beyond the walls of the airport lounge. Marcus remained seated with quiet composure as the reactions continued to ripple through the room. Finally, he spoke again in the same calm voice that had guided the conversation since the beginning. "I did not come here this morning expecting to hold an extended discussion about corporate culture," he said. Ethan managed a faint smile that carried more humility than confidence. "I suspect none of us expected that either," he admitted. Marcus looked toward the runway one more time, where another aircraft was preparing for departure. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important evaluations happen in ordinary places when people believe the moment does not matter." The lounge fell silent again as the meaning of his words settled over the small group of airline employees who were now fully aware that the quiet passenger sitting beside the window might soon play a decisive role in determining what the future of their airline would look like once the corporate review reached its conclusion. The silence inside the lounge lingered longer than anyone expected after Marcus Bennett finished speaking, and the quiet weight of his words settled over the small group gathered near the center of the room. No one laughed now. No one shifted casually or pretended the moment meant nothing. Ethan Cole stood with his hands resting lightly at his sides, but his posture had changed from the confident stance he carried earlier that morning. Tyler Reyes kept his eyes down for a moment as if studying the polished floor, while Olivia Parker continued holding the tablet close against her chest, where the corporate message still glowed faintly on the screen. Beyond the glass wall, another aircraft slowly turned at the end of the runway before beginning its long acceleration into the sky. The steady roar of its engines vibrated faintly through the lounge windows, but inside the room the quiet remained unbroken. Marcus Bennett rested comfortably in the leather chair beside the window, exactly where he had been sitting since the moment he arrived. The small table beside him held his phone, which now displayed a steady stream of notifications arriving from corporate offices far away from the airport terminal. Yet Marcus did not appear hurried or tense. His expression remained thoughtful, as if he were observing a situation unfold that he had anticipated long before stepping inside the lounge that morning. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat again and stepped forward half a pace. "Mr. Bennett," he said with careful respect, "if the Oversight Committee is reviewing operational culture, then I believe we should clarify what exactly you observed today." Marcus lifted his eyes toward him calmly. "Clarification is always helpful," he replied. Tyler looked up uneasily and glanced toward the small service card where he had earlier placed the clippers inside the drawer. The simple metallic buzz of that tool still seemed to echo in his memory, even though the device now remained hidden out of sight. He spoke quietly. "Look, I know things may have gotten a little careless earlier," he said, "but this lounge is usually relaxed, and people joke around sometimes." Ethan shot him a quick glance, but did not interrupt. Marcus listened without reacting. Tyler continued slowly. "I did not mean anything by it. It was just a joke," he said. Olivia shifted slightly beside him. The word joke seemed to hang in the air with a different meaning now than it had 10 minutes earlier. Marcus folded his hands together calmly before answering. "Humor inside a workplace can sometimes reveal more about the culture than formal statements do," he said. His tone remained gentle but firm enough that nobody mistook the seriousness behind the words. Ethan nodded slowly as he absorbed the meaning. "That is true," he admitted. "Corporate leadership often talks about the difference between intention and impact." Marcus nodded once. "Exactly," he said. The travelers in the lounge continued watching quietly as the conversation unfolded. A man near the coffee counter leaned closer to hear, while another traveler across the room pretended to scroll through messages on his phone while clearly listening to every word. The small lounge had become a stage where an unexpected conversation about professionalism and responsibility was taking place in real time. Olivia glanced again at the tablet screen where another line of text had appeared, beneath the previous message. Her eyes widened slightly as she read it. Ethan noticed the change in her expression immediately. "What does it say now?" he asked. Olivia hesitated only a moment before reading aloud. "The Oversight Committee has requested preliminary context regarding observed passenger interactions within executive service environments," she said quietly. Tyler looked confused. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked. Ethan answered slowly. "It means they want details about how passengers are treated inside spaces like this lounge," he said. Marcus nodded slightly. "That is correct." Tyler swallowed and glanced briefly toward Marcus again. "So they might ask about what happened here earlier," he said. Marcus met his gaze calmly. "They might," he replied. Another soft notification chimed from Marcus's phone. He lifted the device briefly and read the message before placing it back on the table. Ethan noticed the motion. "Has the committee responded already?" he asked. Marcus nodded once. "They have acknowledged the review request," he said. Tyler shifted again. "And what does that mean for us?" he asked. Marcus leaned back slightly in the chair and allowed a thoughtful pause before answering. "It means the process is moving forward," he said. Olivia felt a growing tension in the room as the implications became clearer with each passing minute. She had joined Pacific Crown Airlines 3 years earlier, believing the company valued professionalism and hospitality. Now she realized that the culture of any organization could be tested in unexpected moments. Ethan took another breath and spoke again. Mr. Bennett, I want to assure you that our intention here has always been to provide excellent service, he said. Marcus regarded him calmly. Intention matters, he replied. But so does awareness. Tyler lowered his eyes again. I understand that now, he said quietly. The travelers nearby exchanged quiet glances as the conversation deepened. One man whispered to another that he had never seen an airline lounge become the setting for a corporate evaluation before. The second traveler nodded slowly without taking his eyes off the scene. Outside the window, the sky had brightened slightly as the morning clouds shifted and sunlight reflected across the wings of an aircraft waiting near the terminal gate. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere remained still and focused. Olivia looked toward Marcus carefully. Mr. Bennett, she said, may I ask something else? Marcus inclined his head. Of course. Olivia continued. When you arrived here today, you chose to observe the environment before identifying yourself, she said. Marcus nodded. Yes. Olivia held his gaze. Does that mean you were evaluating the airline before the acquisition decision is finalized? Marcus paused briefly before answering. Evaluation begins long before formal documents are signed, he said. Tyler looked surprised by the statement. You mean you were watching how things work here before deciding whether to buy the airline, he asked. Marcus responded calmly. I was observing how the company presents itself through the actions of its people, he said. Ethan felt the weight of the explanation settle in his mind. That is often the most honest measure of a company's values, he admitted quietly. Marcus nodded once. Exactly. Another notification appeared on Olivia's tablet, and she read it quickly. The committee is requesting that all supervisors remain available for follow-up communication within the hour, she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. So this review is moving faster than usual, he said. Marcus looked toward the runway again, where another aircraft was slowly turning toward departure. Sometimes important decisions require immediate clarity, he replied. Tyler glanced around the room again, noticing that nearly every traveler had become an audience to the unfolding moment. He spoke quietly. I never thought a simple mistake could lead to something like this, he said. Marcus looked at him with calm understanding. Small moments often reveal larger truths, he said. The lounge fell silent again as everyone present considered the meaning behind those words. Ethan looked toward Marcus with a mixture of humility and determination. Mr. Bennett, he said, whatever happens next, I hope the committee will recognize that people can learn from mistakes. Marcus studied him for a moment before answering. Growth is always possible when people are willing to face the truth, he said. The statement settled over the room with quiet finality while the soft sound of another departing aircraft echoed faintly beyond the glass windows, reminding everyone that the world outside continued moving forward even as the future of the airline itself quietly hung in balance inside the lounge. The quiet inside the lounge did not break immediately after Marcus Bennett finished speaking. Instead, the silence stretched across the room in a way that made every small sound more noticeable than before. A coffee cup touched the saucer at the far end of the lounge with a faint click. The low hum of the air conditioning system whispered through the ceiling vents. Outside the tall windows, another aircraft began its slow roll toward the runway as sunlight filtered through the shifting cloud cover above Chicago. Marcus remained seated exactly where he had been since the beginning of the morning, his posture relaxed but alert, his attention moving calmly between the airline staff standing in front of him. Ethan Cole was the first to speak again, though the authority that once colored his voice had softened into something closer to careful respect. Mr. Bennett, he said, I believe we should address the situation openly if this review process is already underway. Marcus nodded once as if he had expected those words. Transparency usually leads to clarity, he replied. Tyler Reyes shifted beside the service cart again, though the nervous energy in his movements had replaced the casual confidence he carried earlier. He looked briefly toward Olivia Parker and then back toward Marcus. Look, he said quietly, I understand now that what happened earlier was not professional. I should not have treated a passenger that way. The statement hung in the air for a moment, as if the entire lounge had been waiting to hear it spoken aloud. Olivia glanced toward Tyler with a faint nod of approval, while Ethan folded his arms loosely across his chest as he considered the words. Marcus listened without interruption. The calm expression on his face did not change, but his eyes remained attentive. Tyler continued after a short pause. At the time it felt like harmless humor, he said, but I can see now that it was careless. The passengers in the lounge remained silent, but their attention did not move away from the small group at the center of the room. A traveler near the window leaned forward slightly, while another quietly closed a laptop so the screen would not distract from the unfolding moment. Marcus finally spoke again with the same measured tone he had used throughout the conversation. Awareness is often the first step toward improvement, he said. Tyler nodded slowly, though the weight of the situation had clearly settled on him. Ethan cleared his throat again and stepped slightly closer to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, he said, our airline promotes a culture of respect for all passengers. If our behavior this morning suggested otherwise, then I want to address that directly. Marcus regarded him calmly. Culture is not defined only by written policies, he replied. It is defined by what people feel comfortable doing when they believe no one important is watching. The sentence carried a quiet truth that made the room grow still again. Olivia looked down briefly at the tablet in her hands where another message appeared from corporate communications. Her eyes moved quickly across the text before she spoke. The Oversight Committee has requested a summary of the interaction that occurred here earlier, she said softly. Ethan inhaled slowly. That means they want details about what happened, he said. Olivia nodded. Yes. Tyler glanced down again toward the service cart where the drawer remained closed. The clippers were no longer visible, but the memory of the earlier moment remained impossible to ignore. He spoke quietly. If they ask, I will tell them exactly what happened, he said. Marcus nodded once in acknowledgement. Honesty will always serve you better than silence, he replied. Outside the windows, a departing aircraft lifted gracefully into the morning sky, leaving a thin trail of white vapor behind it as it climbed above the airport skyline. The movement drew the attention of several travelers who watched the aircraft disappear into the clouds before returning their focus to the conversation unfolding inside the lounge. Ethan noticed the shift in the room and spoke again. Mr. Bennett, if the Oversight Committee is reviewing our conduct, I want to be clear about something, he said. Marcus waited. Ethan continued. The responsibility for what happens in this lounge ultimately belongs to me as supervisor. Tyler glanced toward him in surprise, but Ethan continued before anyone could interrupt. I should have corrected the situation immediately, he said. Marcus listened carefully. Leadership often reveals itself in moments when a decision must be made quickly, he said. Ethan nodded slowly. That is true, he admitted. Olivia glanced again at the tablet as another notification appeared. She read the message silently before lifting her eyes toward Marcus. The committee is preparing to initiate a direct call with the lounge supervisor, she said. Ethan blinked once as the implication settled in. With me, he asked. Olivia nodded. Yes, within the next few minutes. Tyler looked from Olivia to Ethan and then toward Marcus. That means they are already moving forward with the review, he said quietly. Marcus picked up his phone once more and checked the newest message on the screen. When he placed it back on the table, his expression remained composed. The committee believes that first-hand communication often provides the clearest understanding of a situation, he said. Ethan straightened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained visible. Very well, he said. If they wish to speak with me, I will answer their questions honestly. Olivia glanced toward the travelers around the room, who continued to observe the unfolding scene with growing fascination. One man whispered to the person beside him that the airline lounge had turned into a corporate meeting room. Another traveler nodded quietly without taking his eyes off Marcus Bennett. Tyler exhaled slowly. I never expected the morning to unfold like this, he said. Marcus looked toward him thoughtfully. Unexpected moments often reveal the most important lessons, he replied. Ethan looked down at his phone as it vibrated softly in his hand. The screen displayed an incoming call from corporate headquarters. The label read Executive Oversight Committee. Ethan inhaled once more before answering. This is Ethan Cole, he said carefully. The voice on the other end spoke clearly enough that the tone could be heard, though not the exact words. Ethan listened for several seconds before responding. Yes, I am currently in the executive lounge at Chicago O'Hare, he said. The travelers in the room leaned slightly closer, though no one attempted to interrupt the call. Ethan continued listening as the corporate voice spoke again. Understood, he replied finally. I will provide a full account of the interaction that occurred this morning. Marcus remained seated quietly as Ethan began explaining the events of the morning to the unseen committee members on the other end of the call. The words were careful and direct. Ethan described the moment Tyler approached Marcus with the clippers and the laughter that followed. He described how the situation had unfolded and how the atmosphere of the lounge had changed once Marcus identified himself as part of the Acquisition Oversight Committee. The room remained silent as the explanation continued. Finally, Ethan lowered the phone slightly after the voice on the other end finished speaking. "Yes, I understand," he said quietly. "We will remain available for further review." The call ended with a soft tone, and Ethan lowered the device slowly. Tyler looked at him anxiously. "What did they say?" he asked. Ethan glanced briefly toward Marcus before answering. "They said the committee will review the situation immediately and determine whether further operational actions are required," he said. The meaning of those words settled over the room like the quiet beginning of a storm that had not yet reached full strength. Marcus Bennett remained seated beside the window watching the reactions around him with calm patience, while the future of Pacific Crown Airlines continued to move quietly through the unseen channels of corporate decision-making far beyond the walls of the airport lounge. The quiet tone that followed Ethan Cole ending the call seemed to stretch across the entire lounge like a long shadow slowly moving across the floor. No one spoke immediately. The travelers who had gathered their attention toward the center of the room remained still, as if they understood instinctively that the moment had not yet reached its conclusion. Outside the tall windows, another aircraft rolled across the runway while a ground vehicle guided it toward a distant gate. The movement of the airport continued with calm precision, but inside the executive lounge time felt suspended. Ethan lowered his phone slowly and looked at Marcus Bennett again. The calm passenger remained seated exactly as he had been since the beginning of the morning, with his hands resting lightly together and his posture relaxed. The difference now was that everyone in the room understood that the quiet man by the window was no longer simply another traveler waiting for a flight. Tyler Reyes shifted his weight beside the service card, while Olivia Parker continued holding the tablet where the oversight messages remained visible. Finally, Tyler spoke in a low voice that carried a mixture of uncertainty and regret. "So the committee is reviewing everything right now," he said. Ethan nodded once. "Yes," he replied quietly. Tyler looked toward Marcus again and then toward the floor. "I did not think something like that moment earlier could lead to this," he admitted. Marcus studied him thoughtfully for a moment before responding. "Moments that appear small can reveal very large truths about an organization," he said calmly. The words settled over the room, and several travelers exchanged quiet glances as if recognizing the deeper meaning behind them. Olivia shifted slightly and looked down at her tablet as another message appeared from corporate communications. She read it silently before lifting her eyes toward Ethan. "There is another update," she said. Ethan straightened slightly, though the tension remained visible in his shoulders. "What does it say?" he asked. Olivia glanced back down to confirm the text before reading it aloud. "The Executive Oversight Committee has requested immediate documentation regarding the culture and conduct standards observed during the preliminary evaluation phase," she said carefully. Tyler frowned slightly. "That sounds like they are building a report," he said. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, it does," he replied. Marcus leaned back slightly in the chair and looked toward the wide windows where sunlight now reflected across the wings of a parked aircraft. "Corporate evaluations often begin with documentation," he said. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "So they are already deciding what to do about the airline?" he asked. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he allowed a thoughtful pause that made the quiet lounge feel even more focused on his words. "Corporate decisions are rarely made instantly," he said finally. "But information gathered in moments like this becomes part of the final judgment." Olivia looked again at the tablet, and then toward Marcus with cautious curiosity. "Mr. Bennett," she said earlier, "you mentioned that culture reveals itself when people believe no one important is watching." Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes." Olivia continued softly. "When you entered the lounge this morning, did you already suspect that the airline might have problems with its internal culture?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "I suspected the company might be facing challenges that were not visible in financial reports," he said. Tyler lifted his head slowly. "What kind of challenges?" he asked. Marcus looked toward him calmly. "The kind that appear when people forget that professionalism applies to every person they encounter," he replied. The travelers in the lounge remained silent, but several nodded slightly, as if they understood the message. A man near the coffee counter quietly whispered to the traveler beside him, that the situation sounded more like a leadership test than a simple passenger complaint. The second traveler nodded without speaking. Ethan folded his arms loosely and looked toward Marcus again. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I want to be completely honest about something." Marcus waited. Ethan continued. "The airline has been under pressure recently because of financial restructuring rumors," he said. "Many employees have been anxious about what might happen to the company." Marcus listened without interrupting. Ethan added quietly, "That pressure sometimes affects how people behave when they think the environment is informal." Marcus nodded once. "Stress can expose weaknesses in a system," he said. Tyler looked down again and spoke quietly. "I guess we showed one of those weaknesses today," he admitted. Marcus regarded him with calm understanding. "What matters now is how the organization responds when those weaknesses are revealed," he said. Olivia glanced again at her tablet as another notification appeared. Her eyes widened slightly. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. Olivia read the new message carefully before speaking. "The committee is requesting a live update regarding the passenger involved in the preliminary observation," she said. Tyler blinked. "They mean Mr. Bennett," he said quietly. Olivia nodded. "Yes." Ethan looked toward Marcus again. "They are asking for confirmation that you are still present in the lounge," he explained. Marcus gave a small nod. "I am still here," he said simply. Olivia typed a quick response into the tablet and then lowered it again. "Message sent," she said. Tyler exhaled slowly as if the air in the room had grown heavier with each passing minute. "This is becoming bigger than anything I imagined," he said. Marcus looked toward him thoughtfully. "Responsibility often appears larger once we begin to understand its consequences," he replied. Outside the windows, another aircraft began accelerating along the runway and lifted smoothly into the sky, leaving the airport behind. The travelers watched it climb for a moment before returning their attention to the quiet scene unfolding inside the lounge. Ethan looked toward Marcus again and spoke carefully. "Mr. Bennett, if the committee concludes that the culture here does not meet their expectations, what happens then?" he asked. Marcus remained silent for a moment before answering. "The oversight committee will present its findings to the board of directors," he said. Tyler swallowed. "And the board decides what to do about the airline," he said. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." Olivia held the tablet against her chest again, as if trying to steady herself. The weight of the conversation had begun to feel almost historic. A traveler near the window whispered quietly that the future of the airline might be decided because of what happened in this room. Ethan heard the whisper, but did not react. Instead, he looked toward Marcus with a seriousness that had replaced his earlier confidence. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "whatever the board decides, I hope they also consider the possibility for people to improve." Marcus studied him carefully before answering. "Improvement is always possible when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes," he said. Tyler nodded slowly, though the worry in his expression remained clear. Olivia looked around the lounge again, noticing that every traveler present seemed fully invested in the unfolding moment. The quiet passenger by the window had turned an ordinary morning into something that felt like a turning point for an entire airline. Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly, while the unseen members of the oversight committee somewhere far from the airport continued reviewing the information that would soon determine what direction Pacific Crown Airlines would take after this unexpected moment inside a quiet executive lounge. The quiet tension that filled the executive lounge did not fade as the minutes passed. Instead, it deepened, settling into the room like a slow-moving tide that no one could ignore. Marcus Bennett remained seated beside the wide window where the morning light reflected across the polished floor and the leather chairs arranged around the lounge. Outside, the airport continued its precise rhythm. Another aircraft rolled slowly along the taxiway, while ground vehicles moved carefully between terminals. The distant sound of jet engines hummed through the glass like a constant reminder that the world outside this room was still moving forward. Inside the lounge, however, everything seemed suspended in a moment that had quietly grown far larger than anyone expected when the morning began. Ethan Cole stood with his phone still in his hand, though the call with the oversight committee had ended several minutes earlier. His posture had shifted again. The confident stance he once carried had softened into something closer to reflection. Tyler Reyes remained near the service cart with his hands resting against the polished edge of the counter, while Olivia Parker held the tablet that displayed the most recent corporate communication. The travelers seated around the lounge continued to observe the scene with quiet fascination. A man near the coffee counter leaned against the bar, while a woman near the window folded her magazine closed and rested it on her lap, so she would not miss what might happen next. The silence was finally broken by Olivia, who glanced down at the tablet as another message appeared. Her eyes moved carefully across the text before she spoke. "There is another update from the oversight committee," she said. Ethan turned toward her immediately. "What does it say?" he asked. Olivia read the message once more before speaking clearly. "The committee is requesting additional context regarding the environment in which the preliminary interaction occurred," she said. Tyler frowned slightly. "What kind of context?" he asked. Ethan answered quietly. "They want to understand the setting of the incident," he said. Marcus looked toward them calmly. "That is a common part of evaluation procedures," he said. Tyler shifted uneasily. "They already know what happened, so why do they need to know about the room?" he asked. Marcus folded his hands together and answered with the same steady tone he had used throughout the morning. "Because environment often reveals why behavior occurs," he said. Olivia nodded slightly as she continued reading the message. "They also want confirmation of how long you have been present in the lounge, Mr. Bennett," she added. Marcus glanced briefly at the large clock mounted near the lounge entrance before answering. "A little more than 30 minutes, he said. Ethan looked toward Olivia. "Please include that in your response," he said. Olivia quickly typed the information into the tablet and sent the update to corporate communications. Tyler exhaled slowly, as if trying to steady his nerves. 30 minutes, he repeated quietly. That was enough time for everything to change. Marcus looked toward him thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes much less time than that," he said. The travelers in the lounge continued listening as the conversation unfolded. A businessman seated near the window leaned closer to the person beside him and whispered that he had never seen an airline executive evaluation happen in real time before. The other traveler nodded slowly without taking his eyes off Marcus Bennett. Ethan finally spoke again, though his tone now carried more honesty than authority. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I want to understand something clearly." Marcus waited. Ethan continued. "When you entered the lounge earlier today, did you already know that this airline might be facing a major acquisition decision?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Yes," he said. Tyler looked surprised. "You knew before you arrived," he said. Marcus nodded once. "The acquisition review process began several weeks ago," he explained. Ethan folded his arms thoughtfully. "That means the board was already evaluating the company long before this morning," he said. Marcus nodded again. "Correct." Olivia looked toward Marcus with quiet curiosity. "And this visit was part of that evaluation?" she asked. Marcus did not hesitate. "Yes," he said calmly. Tyler rubbed his hands together nervously. "So when you walked into the lounge today, you were already observing how the airline operates," he said. Marcus looked toward him and gave a small nod. "Observation is often the most reliable way to understand an organization," he replied. The room grew quiet again as the weight of that explanation settled over the small group standing near the center of the lounge. Outside the window, another aircraft began its climb into the cloudy morning sky, leaving the runway behind. The sound of its engines faded slowly into the distance. Ethan looked down briefly at his phone and then back toward Marcus. "I have worked in this industry for a long time," he said, "but I have never seen a corporate evaluation unfold like this." Marcus responded gently. "The most honest evaluations rarely happen inside conference rooms," he said. Tyler glanced again toward the drawer of the service cart where the clippers had been placed earlier. His expression tightened slightly as the memory returned. "I wish that moment earlier had never happened," he admitted quietly. Marcus regarded him calmly. "Regret often arrives after understanding," he said. Olivia looked again at the tablet as another small notification appeared on the screen. Her eyes widened slightly before she spoke. "There is a message marked priority," she said. Ethan turned toward her quickly. "What does it say?" Olivia read the line carefully before answering. "The Oversight Committee has informed the Board of Directors that the preliminary observation phase has concluded," she said. Tyler blinked in surprise. "That sounds serious," he murmured. Ethan felt his pulse quicken slightly. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked. Olivia continued reading. "The board will now review the findings and determine whether operational adjustments are required," she said. The room fell silent once more as the significance of those words spread quietly through the lounge. Marcus Bennett remained seated by the window with the same calm expression he had maintained since the moment he arrived. The travelers continued watching as if they understood they were witnessing the beginning of a decision that could soon affect thousands of employees and passengers far beyond the walls of the airport lounge. Ethan looked toward Marcus again, with a seriousness that reflected the gravity of the moment. "Mr. Bennett," he said softly, "if the board decides changes are necessary, what happens next?" Marcus allowed a thoughtful pause before answering. "Then the company begins a new chapter," he said. Tyler glanced around the lounge again, noticing that every person in the room seemed fully aware that something historic might be unfolding. The quiet morning that had begun like any other travel day had transformed into a moment of reflection for an entire airline. And while the board of directors now considered the information gathered during the last 30 minutes, Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly beside the window waiting for the next message that would reveal what direction Pacific Crown Airlines would take after this unexpected morning inside the executive lounge. For several long seconds after Olivia Parker finished reading the message from the Oversight Committee, the executive lounge remained completely still. The words "preliminary observation phase has concluded" seemed to hover in the air like a quiet signal that the morning had reached a turning point. Marcus Bennett remained seated in the same leather chair beside the window where the sunlight now spread across the polished wood floor in a wide golden reflection. Once as she glanced again at the screen. "Yes, that is what the message confirms," she replied. Tyler looked from Olivia to Marcus and then back again. "What happens after that?" he asked. Marcus Bennett lifted his eyes toward him calmly. "After observation comes evaluation," he said. The simple sentence settled over the room like a quiet announcement. Tyler exhaled slowly, as if trying to absorb the meaning. "Evaluation of what exactly?" he asked. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Evaluation of whether the culture and leadership of this airline align with the standards expected by its future ownership," he said. The travelers nearby exchanged glances as the implications became clearer. A businessman seated near the window leaned toward the person beside him and whispered that it sounded like the airline might be on the edge of a major decision. The second traveler nodded quietly. Ethan folded his arms across his chest and looked toward Marcus again. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "earlier you mentioned that the Oversight Committee would present findings to the Board of Directors." Marcus nodded once. "That is correct." Ethan continued carefully. "And now that the observation phase is complete, the board will review those findings," he said. Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Yes." Tyler looked uneasy. "How long does something like that usually take?" he asked. Marcus glanced briefly at the phone resting on the table beside him, where new notifications had quietly appeared. "Sometimes hours," he said. "Sometimes days." Olivia looked toward the tablet again as another line of text appeared beneath the previous message. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen. "There is an additional note," she said softly. Ethan looked toward her immediately. "What does it say?" he asked. Olivia read the message slowly to be certain of the wording. "The Board of Directors has acknowledged the preliminary findings and will deliver a directive following immediate consultation," she said. Tyler frowned slightly. "Immediate consultation," he repeated. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That means the board is discussing it right now," he said. Marcus did not appear surprised. "Corporate leadership often moves quickly when the evidence is clear," he said. Tyler shifted his weight again and looked toward the window where another aircraft was beginning its slow taxi toward the runway. "It is strange," he said quietly. 30 minutes ago this lounge felt like any other travel space." Marcus allowed a faint smile. "That is how important moments often begin," he replied. Olivia looked toward Marcus again with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "may I ask something personal?" Marcus nodded slightly. "Of course." Olivia continued carefully. "During the observation earlier you remained calm, even after what happened with the Clippers," she said. "Many passengers would have reacted differently." Marcus paused for a moment before answering. "Experience teaches patience," he said. Tyler looked toward him again with quiet curiosity. "Has something like that happened to you before?" he asked. Marcus looked out toward the runway where an aircraft lifted slowly into the morning sky before he spoke again. "In different forms, yes," he said calmly. Ethan listened carefully to the answer, though Marcus did not elaborate further. The statement alone carried enough meaning. Olivia lowered the tablet slightly and glanced around the room. The travelers were still watching closely, as if they understood that the story unfolding in the lounge had moved beyond a simple passenger interaction. Ethan spoke again with a tone that carried both humility and determination. Mr. Bennett, regardless of what decision the board reaches, I hope they understand that people inside this company care deeply about the airline, he said. Marcus regarded him thoughtfully. Dedication is an important foundation for any organization, he replied. Tyler nodded quietly. I have worked here for 5 years, he said. I never imagined a moment like this would happen during a normal shift. Marcus looked toward him. Important lessons rarely arrive during extraordinary circumstances, he said. They appear during ordinary ones. Olivia glanced again at the tablet, and then at the clock mounted near the entrance of the lounge. Only a short time had passed since the oversight committee began its review, yet the atmosphere inside the room made it feel as if hours had gone by. Ethan checked his phone briefly, and then returned his attention to Marcus. Do you expect the board to respond soon, he asked. Marcus answered calmly. If they are already consulting, it usually means a directive is coming quickly, he said. The travelers in the lounge exchanged quiet looks again, as if the entire room had become part of a story none of them would forget after their flights departed. Outside the windows, a bright reflection moved across the wings of a parked aircraft as sunlight pushed through the morning clouds. Inside the lounge, every person present felt the quiet anticipation, building with each passing minute. Tyler finally spoke again, though his voice carried less anxiety than before. Whatever happens next, I hope the company becomes stronger because of it, he said. Marcus nodded once. That is always the goal of honest evaluation, he replied. Olivia's tablet vibrated softly once more, and she looked down at the screen again, though she did not speak yet. Ethan noticed the motion immediately. Another message, he asked. Olivia lifted her eyes slowly. Yes, she said. Tyler leaned slightly closer. What does it say? Olivia took a breath before answering. The board of directors has completed its initial consultation, she said quietly. The lounge grew completely silent as the meaning of that statement settled across the room. Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly beside the window while the travelers and airline staff waited for the next line of the message that would reveal whether Pacific Crown Airlines was about to enter a very different future than the one anyone expected when the morning began. For a moment after Olivia Parker said the board of directors has completed its initial consultation, the executive lounge felt as though every sound had been quietly turned down. The steady hum of the airport outside the wide windows seemed distant now, as if the world beyond the glass had stepped back to allow the moment inside the room to unfold. Marcus Bennett remained seated in the same leather chair beside the window where the morning light stretched across the floor in long reflections. His posture had not changed since the first moment he arrived, yet the attention of everyone in the lounge had gradually moved toward him as if gravity itself had shifted in his direction. Ethan Cole stood a few steps away with his phone resting in his hand, though he had not looked at the screen since Olivia read the message. Tyler Reyes remained beside the service cart with his hands lightly gripping the polished edge, while Olivia held the tablet where the newest corporate communication waited to be read. Around them, the travelers continued watching in quiet fascination. Some leaned forward slightly, while others sat perfectly still as if understanding that they were witnessing the closing moments of a decision that had begun far away in a boardroom, but had found its most revealing evidence inside this lounge. Olivia glanced down at the screen again, before finally continuing. There is another line beneath that message, she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her immediately. What does it say, he asked. Olivia read the text carefully to ensure she did not miss a single word. The board of directors has authorized the oversight committee to proceed with immediate executive determination regarding operational leadership and cultural compliance, she said slowly. Tyler frowned slightly as he tried to understand the meaning behind the formal language. That sounds serious, he murmured. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. It means the board is prepared to act based on what the committee observed, he said. Marcus Bennett listened calmly without interruption. The quiet confidence in his expression remained unchanged, as if the direction of the conversation had always been expected. Olivia continued reading the message, and her eyes moved across the screen with growing focus. There is a final line, she said. Ethan looked toward her again. Please read it, he said. Olivia lifted the tablet slightly and spoke clearly. The Oversight Committee will now confirm the identity and authority of the committee chair responsible for the preliminary observation phase, she said. Tyler blinked slowly. Committee chair, he repeated. Ethan looked toward Marcus instinctively, though he did not speak immediately. Marcus met his gaze with calm composure. The travelers in the lounge noticed the shift in attention, and many of them followed Ethan's glance toward the man seated by the window. Tyler looked from Ethan to Marcus and then back again. "Wait," he said quietly. "The message means they are confirming who led the observation." Olivia nodded once. "Yes, that appears to be the meaning." Ethan exhaled slowly as the realization settled into place. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, "were you the committee chair responsible for this evaluation?" Marcus Bennett allowed a brief pause before answering. "Yes," he said calmly. The room fell silent in a way that felt almost physical. Tyler looked stunned for a moment, as if the final piece of the situation had just clicked into place in his mind. "You mean you were not only observing the airline, you were leading the evaluation," he said. Marcus nodded once. "That is correct." Olivia lowered the tablet slightly, as if the weight of the moment had suddenly become more real. Ethan straightened slowly, though his posture now reflected humility rather than authority. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I understand now why the board requested confirmation of the committee chair." Marcus looked toward him calmly. "Transparency is an essential part of any evaluation process," he replied. Tyler glanced around the lounge again, noticing that every traveler present seemed fully aware that something significant had just been revealed. The quiet passenger who had been treated casually earlier in the morning was not only part of the acquisition review. He had been guiding it from the beginning. Ethan finally spoke again with a tone that carried both seriousness and respect. "Mr. Bennett, if you were the chair of the oversight committee, then the observations made here today carried direct authority with the board," he said. Marcus nodded slightly. "They will be considered as part of the final determination," he confirmed. Tyler lowered his eyes briefly and then looked back toward Marcus. "I understand now why you remained calm earlier," he said quietly. Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced out the window where another aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky above the airport before he spoke again. "Anger rarely leads to clarity," he said. Olivia looked toward Marcus thoughtfully. "And clarity was what the committee needed," she said. Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Yes." Ethan checked his phone as it vibrated softly in his hand. The screen displayed a new message from corporate headquarters. He read it quickly before lifting his eyes again. "The board is requesting confirmation from the oversight chair before issuing the directive," he said. Tyler looked toward Marcus. "That means they are waiting for your confirmation," he said. Marcus reached calmly for the phone resting on the table beside him and read the message displayed on the screen. For a moment, he remained silent as the lounge watched him with quiet anticipation. Then he placed the phone back on the table and looked toward Ethan. "The confirmation has been sent," he said. Olivia glanced down at her tablet again almost immediately as another notification appeared. "The board has received the confirmation," she said. Tyler swallowed slowly. "So what happens now?" he asked. Olivia read the newest message carefully before answering. "The board will now issue its directive regarding the future operational structure of Pacific Crown Airlines," she said. The room grew still again as everyone present absorbed the significance of those words. Outside the window, a departing aircraft roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, but inside the lounge the sound seemed distant, compared to the quiet anticipation filling the room. Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly beside the window while the airline staff and travelers waited for the next message that would reveal how the board of directors intended to respond to the events that had unfolded during the past hour inside a quiet executive lounge at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. For several long seconds after Olivia Parker read the message confirming that the board of directors was preparing to issue its directive, the executive lounge remained suspended in a quiet anticipation that seemed to slow the passage of time itself. Marcus Bennett remained seated beside the wide window where the bright reflection of the morning sky stretched across the polished floor. The calm composure in his posture had not changed since the moment he first walked into the lounge earlier that morning, yet the understanding of who he truly was had transformed the atmosphere of the room completely. Ethan Cole stood a few steps away holding his phone, while Tyler Reyes remained beside the service cart with his hands resting lightly on the counter, and Olivia Parker continued to hold the tablet, where the most recent corporate communication glowed softly on the screen. Around them, the travelers inside the lounge watched with quiet attention. Some leaned forward slightly, while others sat back in their chairs with their eyes fixed on the small group standing near the center of the room. Outside the tall windows, the steady movement of Chicago O'Hare continued as another aircraft rolled slowly along the taxiway, guided by the painted lines of the runway. Yet inside the lounge, the outside world seemed distant compared to the silent tension that filled the room. Olivia glanced down at the tablet again when it vibrated softly in her hands. A new message appeared on the screen. She read the first line silently before lifting her eyes toward Ethan. "There is an update," she said quietly. Ethan straightened slightly and looked toward her. "Please read it," he said. Olivia focused on the text again to make certain she understood it clearly before speaking. "The board of directors has issued its directive regarding the operational leadership review of Pacific Crown Airlines," she said slowly. Tyler felt his chest tighten slightly as the words settled over the room. Ethan glanced toward Marcus briefly before returning his attention to Olivia. "Continue," he said calmly. Though the tension in his voice was unmistakable, Olivia read the next line from the screen. "Effective immediately, the board authorizes the Oversight Committee to implement leadership restructuring and operational compliance measures based on the findings of the preliminary evaluation," she said. Tyler exhaled quietly. "That sounds like they are going to change leadership," he murmured. Ethan nodded slowly, though his eyes remained fixed on Olivia. "What else does it say?" he asked. Olivia scrolled slightly on the screen and continued reading. "The directive acknowledges the authority of the Oversight Committee chair to confirm the implementation of these measures," she said. Tyler looked toward Marcus instinctively. "That means you," he said softly. Marcus Bennett remained calm as he met Tyler's gaze. "Yes," he replied. The quiet certainty of his voice seemed to ripple through the room. Ethan took a slow breath before speaking again. "Mr. Bennett, the board is placing the responsibility of this decision in your hands," he said. Marcus looked toward him thoughtfully. "The responsibility belongs to the organization as a whole," he said. Tyler shifted slightly as the meaning of the directive began to settle in his mind. "Does this mean the airline will be shut down?" he asked. Marcus shook his head gently. "Not necessarily," he said. Olivia looked at the screen again. "There is another paragraph," she added. Ethan gestured slightly for her to continue. Olivia read the text carefully. "The directive emphasizes that the goal of the restructuring is to restore professional standards and ensure a culture of respect for all passengers and employees," she said. Tyler lowered his eyes briefly as the earlier moment with the clippers returned to his mind. Ethan folded his arms thoughtfully and looked toward Marcus again. "Mr. Bennett, if the board expects you to confirm the implementation, what will that involve?" he asked. Marcus leaned forward slightly in his chair, as if preparing to address the question with careful clarity. "Implementation will involve reviewing the conduct of the individuals involved in the observation and determining whether leadership changes are required to protect the integrity of the airline," he said calmly. The travelers around the lounge listened with intense focus as the conversation unfolded. A man seated near the window whispered quietly to the person beside him that the airline might be entering a new era because of what had happened in this room. The other traveler nodded slowly. Tyler looked toward Marcus again with a mixture of concern and honesty. "If changes are required, does that mean people here could lose their jobs?" he asked. Marcus paused briefly before answering. "Consequences are sometimes part of accountability," he said. Ethan listened carefully and then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. Olivia glanced again at the tablet as another message appeared beneath the directive. She read it silently before speaking. "The board is requesting final confirmation from the Oversight Committee chair that the directive will be carried out," she said. Tyler looked toward Marcus again. "That means the final step is yours," he said. Marcus reached for his phone once more and looked at the message displayed on the screen. The quiet motion drew the attention of everyone in the room. The travelers watched as if the small device in Marcus's hand had suddenly become the center of the moment. For several seconds, Marcus remained silent while reading the message from the board of directors. Then he lowered the phone and looked toward Ethan, Tyler, and Olivia. "The directive will be acknowledged," he said calmly. Olivia immediately checked the tablet again as another notification appeared. "The board has received the acknowledgement," she said. Ethan glanced toward Marcus with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. "What happens next?" he asked. Marcus answered quietly. "Now the organization begins the work of becoming better than it was yesterday," he said. Tyler nodded slowly, though the seriousness of the moment remained clear in his expression. Olivia looked around the lounge, noticing that every traveler present seemed aware that they had just witnessed the turning point of a decision that would soon affect thousands of employees and passengers across the country. Outside the window, another aircraft lifted gracefully into the bright sky, leaving the runway behind, while inside the executive lounge Marcus Bennett remained seated calmly beside the window, having just confirmed the directive that would determine the future direction of Pacific Crown Airlines. The message confirming the directive from the board of directors had already been acknowledged, and yet the atmosphere inside the executive lounge did not immediately relax. Instead, the quiet inside the room seemed to deepen, as if everyone present understood that the acknowledgement Marcus Bennett had just given was only the beginning of what the directive would actually mean. Marcus remained seated beside the wide window where the bright morning light stretched across the polished floor and reflected softly off the glass tables. Outside, the airport continued moving with perfect routine as another aircraft rolled toward the runway, and ground crews guided service vehicles between the gates. The steady rhythm of travel carried on as it always did, but inside the lounge the attention of every traveler remained fixed on the small group near the center of the room. Ethan Cole stood with a more measured posture now, while Tyler Reyes remained beside the service cart, and Olivia Parker held the tablet that had delivered the message from corporate headquarters. For several seconds no one spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly, "I believe we all understand now that the board has authorized significant changes." Marcus looked toward him calmly. "Yes," he replied. Tyler shifted his weight slightly and glanced toward the drawer where the clippers had been placed earlier, as if the memory of that moment had returned once again. "Does the directive mean those changes begin immediately?" he asked. Marcus nodded once. "Lounge," he said. Marcus studied him thoughtfully before responding. "Acknowledgement is an important step," he said calmly. Tyler looked toward Marcus with quiet concern. "But the directive might still lead to consequences," he said. Marcus nodded once. "Accountability often follows acknowledgement," he replied. Olivia glanced again at the tablet where a new notification appeared from corporate communications. She read it silently before speaking. "The board has requested confirmation that operational standards will be enforced across all customer-facing areas," she said. The lounge, once more noticing that every traveler present seemed to understand the importance of what was being discussed. A quiet morning that had begun with routine travel had turned into a defining moment for the future culture of the airline. Olivia glanced down at the tablet again when another notification appeared. She read it quickly and then lifted her eyes toward Marcus. "The board is requesting confirmation that the directive will now move into its implementation phase," she said. Ethan looked toward Marcus again. Ethan Cole stood near the center of the lounge with his phone resting loosely in his hand, while Tyler Reyes remained beside the service cart, and Olivia Parker held the tablet that had delivered the directive from the board of directors. Around them, the travelers who had witnessed the entire moment remained seated, yet none of them appeared eager to leave the room immediately. It was as if they understood they had just seen a story unfold that would remain in their memory long after their flights departed. Ethan looked toward Marcus again with a thoughtful expression that reflected the shift in his perspective since the beginning of the morning. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly, "I believe today has shown all of us something we will not forget." Marcus looked toward him calmly. "Moments like this often leave a lasting impression," he replied. Tyler nodded slowly while resting his hands on the counter beside him. "I have worked here for years," he said, "and I always believed this lounge was simply another part of the airport where travelers pass through. Today it feels like it became something else entirely." Marcus allowed a faint smile as he listened. "Sometimes the most ordinary places become the setting for the most important lessons," he said. Olivia glanced around the lounge, once more noticing the travelers who had quietly observed the entire conversation from beginning to end. A businessman near the window offered a small nod of respect toward Marcus, while another traveler lifted his coffee cup slightly in silent acknowledgement before returning to his seat. The room no longer felt tense. Instead, it carried the quiet understanding that a turning point had just occurred. Ethan folded his arms loosely as he looked toward Marcus again. "Mr. Bennett, earlier you said that culture reveals itself when people believe no one important is watching," he said. Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes." Ethan continued thoughtfully. "I believe everyone here understands that now." Marcus looked out the window for a moment where another aircraft lifted smoothly into the bright sky above Chicago before he spoke again. "Real leadership is not measured by titles or uniforms," he said. "It is measured by how people treat one another when they think the moment is too small to matter." Tyler lowered his eyes briefly as the words settled in his mind. I will remember that, he said quietly. Olivia held the to represent. Marcus glanced once more toward the runway outside the window where another aircraft was preparing for departure before he spoke his final words to the small group gathered around him. I did not need a camera or a courtroom today, he said quietly. The truth was already here in this room, waiting to be seen. He paused for a moment, allowing the silence to settle before finishing the thought that would remain with everyone present long after the morning ended. Sometimes the most powerful proof is simply allowing people to see who they become when they believe no one is watching. With that, Marcus Bennett turned calmly toward the exit of the executive lounge, while the travelers and airline staff remained standing in thoughtful silence, realizing that the quiet events of the past hour had changed far more than a single airline policy. They had revealed how dignity and accountability could transform an ordinary moment into a lesson that would echo far beyond the walls of the airport.